Good evening, all. Well, this was supposed to have been recorded about a week ago in Italy, where I've been enjoying a fantastic holiday. The only trouble was the farmhouse that I was staying at didn't have working Wi-Fi, and I was going to do this video and perhaps one other. With this lovely backdrop, we were in the farmhouse, and in the background was a swimming pool, and we had olive trees and the kind of rolling hills just north of Rome in the background. It would have looked fantastic, but there were all these mosquitoes as well. So I would have been sort of slapping myself and wafting bugs away as I was doing the video. So I thought I'd put it on hold and wait till I got back to the UK to do this. So here I am. Anyway, I'm continuing my series of top 10 people who define the progressive left, and tonight I'm dealing with Maxine Waters. And I'm going to cut straight to the chase here. What I think makes her a defining figure on the left at the moment is that speech she gave, where she called for an end of civil discourse with political opponents, that any member of the Trump administration or Trump supporters needed to be, in her words, driven out of public spaces. You needed to push back against them. And I think she meant physically push them back, not just say, I disagree with what you're doing or remonstrate with them, but actually push them out of public spaces. And you saw this happen with Donald Trump's press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary. It's not like she's a cabinet member who's making policies. But she needed to be driven out of a restaurant. The actor Peter Fonda, who hasn't been relevant since The Limey, was calling for people to go into the houses of people in the Trump administration or Trump supporters and drag them out, give them a kicking. This is where we are now. With Waters, her audience lapped this up. Here she is, a very senior figure in the Democrat Party, actually calling for violence towards political opponents. Now, I did a hugely unpopular video on this. Not many people watched it, and one person gave it a thumbs down. Nobody gave it a thumbs up, but do I care? No, I don't. And it was about Mark Bray. Now, Mark Bray is a professor. He's a left-wing academic and activist who wrote a very popular book on Antifa. Well, I say very popular book, but it was popular with his crowd. The Antifa Handbook, and it was widely referred to on left-leaning media sites who kind of soft-pedaled it. But Bray, in that book, essentially boiled down conflict with your political opponents in 3 steps. Well, the first one is to accuse somebody of being a fascist, and that's your subjective viewpoint. You don't need any objective criteria to define someone as a fascist in his opinion, because fascism is malleable. You see, it takes on other characteristics, so it's hard to define what a fascist is, but you know one if you see one, and you can denounce them. So it's denunciation is the first step. The second is to interpret anything that this supposed fascist says or does as violence. So if they say something critical of you, you can interpret that as violence. Violence is entirely subjective, he argued. You can construe anything to be violence, a look, a glare, a presence, words. You don't actually have to physically assault someone for it to be violence. His words, not mine. And the third thing he says is that you need to take direct action. You have to bypass the law and ignore the monopoly that the state has on violence to keep the peace or to keep the public safe. No, you have to get onto the streets yourself and do this and punch who you think is a fascist. This is Mark Bray's 3 rules. And Maxine Waters, who is a more prominent figure, senior member of the Democrat Party, is essentially saying the same thing. If you see your political opponent, you have to actually drive them out by any means necessary with the use of violence. People take this on board. This is why we're seeing so many violent demonstrations. These people like Bray and Waters are just empowering organizations such as Antifa. They are trying to get people on the moderate left to go further and further left until they see the use of violence as a viable tool that should be used. And if they're not going to initiate violence themselves, they're going to make excuses for it. So this is extremely disturbing, and I think that's an understatement. But the thing about Waters is that she's seen this before. She's quite an old lady, and she has seen or lived through the times when fascism, Stalinism, Maoism, these evil, despotic regimes used political violence to silence opposition. That was a feature of her childhood growing up, that these despotic nations were a very real threat to the country and society she grew up in. And she would have witnessed violence, people taking the law into their own hands, lynch mobs. And following on from that, in the civil rights movement era, she would have seen the Watts riots, the 1968 Democrat riots at the Democratic Convention, 1968 in Chicago. She would have seen that. They lived through the times, the assassinations of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And those were dangerous times on American streets, the unbridled violence and destruction and death on the streets. And she has forgotten the other side, the side we remember, the side we celebrate emerging from the civil rights movement. We celebrate Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, the athletes, Tommy Smith at the 1968 Olympics doing the Black Power salute. These are the heroes that emerged from that era that said that, come on, we can be equal, and that we're going to fight not through violence, but through powerful statements, through powerful gestures that don't involve physically attacking people. And Maxine Waters has discarded that, and she's tapped into something primeval and dark and sinister. Now, people on the right have been calling Maxine Waters kind of crazy and bonkers. But is that how people on the left and even the centre left, the social democrat left, the third way left, do they see her as bonkers? If so, who's speaking out against this? She gets a free ride. Mark Bray gets a free ride. These are preachers of violence. And the flip side is, people say, well, what about Trump? Or the rhetoric from Trump and the Trump supporters? Well, the call is there. If you think that's how Trump is running things, then surely the counter to that would be to put somebody very moderate. But why are the Democrats in a race to sound crazier than Donald Trump? Why are they just going more insane and embracing violence? They may think these are desperate times we live in, but is the answer to desperation that level of violence? Or is the answer to it a message of hope going forwards that includes people, that doesn't divide people into armed camps? Because this is what's going to happen. Do you think Sarah Huckabee Sanders or anybody else in the Trump administration or any Trump supporter is going to sit there and think, I can't go out to a restaurant tonight? They're going to push me back. So why are they pushing me back? Maybe I need to rethink my whole life. No, they don't. They're going to bring security in. They're going to bring their bodyguards in to keep people who are inspired by Maxine Waters out. The gates will go up, the bodyguards, the goons will surround the people who are the targets. This isn't going to end with people falling on their knees begging for forgiveness, because as we know, people like Maxine Waters will not forgive anyone for their past actions or their past allegiances. And this is why, you may think she's a crazy old lady ranting about violence, but this is a very real threat, because she is inspiring a new generation who are happy to forget about peaceful demonstration, who are happy to forget rhetorical and debating skills, and who at the end of the day will not break bread, will not share communion with somebody who is a political opponent. We're seeing this happen. It's breaking down even in my little world. People who I've known for more than 20 years are now forming groups opposed, the arguments, the clashes, friendships are falling apart. I'm witnessing it. And it's people like Maxine Waters and Mark Bray who are just pouring petrol onto this incendiary situation. So the call to any Democrat, anybody in the Democratic Party who might just be watching this, the call is, who are you going to be? Are you going to fall in with the baying mob, the torchlit mob, or are you going to try and find a reasonable way? Are you going to be the sane voice against not just people in your own party that want to put the boot in, but perhaps against Trump-led Republicans? Because I think the person on the Democrat Party who comes across as really reasonable and understanding is the one that's going to topple Trump, not the mad uh, race baiter. Okay, so until next time, that is all for tonight. I will see you soon. Bye.